Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, April the 8th, 2024. Today I want to talk about something that I know pretty much nothing about, and that is Sean Combs, also known as p.diddy, Puff Daddy, etc. And apparently he is a rapper and a record producer and a record executive, and he is fantastically successful, and he has been having a lot of legal issues recently. I believe in November a former partner, Cassie Ventura, took him to court, and she was talking about, I think, 10 years of a cycle of abuse, violence and sex trafficking. And I wanted to consider his chart. So I'm looking at it from a perspective of astrology. I'm not claiming any knowledge about him. I'm just looking at his chart here. And I'm looking at his noon chart because I don't know what time he's born. And I've looked at his chart, and I do think it's actually quite an interesting chart. And it may give us information about two hypothetical planets, those being Cupido and Zeus. I haven't really talked much about Cupido. I kind of find Hades more interesting. But Cupido and Zeus really seem to stand out in that chart. And I do want to look at those two planets with reference to Sean Combs. I don't know what to call him. P.Diddy? Maybe P.Diddy, I should call him that. I've no idea. But that is what I will be talking about today. But before I talk about P.Diddy, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, April the 8th, 2024. So here we have the horoscope for today. I've set it for noon. I've set it for New York. I set it for New York simply as a matter of convenience. It's not just for New York. It's just telling us what's happening in the world. Let's have a look at what's going on in this chart. Moon is clearly in Aries. I mean, we have got a new moon eclipse today. Moon is in Aries. Sun is in Aries. Chiron is in Aries. Mercury is in Aries. Venus is in Aries. North Node is in Aries. So there is a big pile up in Aries. So it's really a very Aries day. And of course we do have this new moon. I suppose for many of us it's a day when we just feel that we have to take the initiative. Okay, we might not be able to take the initiative, but I think there is going to be pressure on us to take the initiative. And we can see here that this new moon is conjunct the North Node. So when you have a new moon conjunct the North Node, by definition, that means you've got an eclipse on your hands, because that is something that will happen at the time of eclipses, because an eclipse of the sun is a special kind of new moon. We have new moons every month, but they're not exact. The moon doesn't generally cover the disk of the sun. It's, it might be like, I don't know, like sun up here, moon here, whatever, but they're out of alignment. But when you have an eclipse, they are in alignment. And in this case, the disk of the moon is covering the disk of the sun. And by definition, you'll have the North Node here. And really, you have to remember what the North Node is. I mean, it's where the path of the sun cuts the path of the moon, the apparent path of the sun. And when that point is also, it coincides with the new moon, coincides with the new moon, that is your eclipse. So there is pressure to take the initiative, and with the North Node is the way we should be moving forward. It's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be acting in a fairly Aries kind of way, regardless of our sign. It is something we need to be doing. So today, consider moments when you should be taking the initiative. You might not want to take the initiative, perhaps because you can't be bothered. Perhaps you'll be worried what people are going to say. You might feel that you're making a nuisance of yourself. But in most cases, it is the right thing to do, though don't take me literally. There are certain situations where we should not take the initiative. If it's a situation where we are in direct danger, when we're just being overly impulsive, then no, of course not. But in a general sense, in a reasonable sense, it is a good idea to be taking the initiative. And for many of us with a new moon, it might be a new beginning. New moon eclipse is the beginning of a new lunar cycle. The moon has transitioned from waning to waxing. When the moon is waning, it's past its peak. It's something is over. It's a dying cycle. When it's waxing, it's a new cycle, and it may be a time to start new projects. Although, remember, there is an eclipse today. I think we have to be a little careful about starting new projects. And I suppose I should mention what time this eclipse takes place. So, London time, the eclipse takes place at 7:21 in the evening. So that means 7:21. That's 2:21 in the afternoon in New York, East Coast. That would be 11:21 in the morning if you're in the West Coast. If you're in Europe, Berlin, Paris, that would be 8:21 in the evening. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, and most Asia, then really the eclipse is something that happens tomorrow. So perhaps that's something you don't immediately have to worry about. But if you are in Australia and New Zealand, remember that the moon will be waning all day long. So any thought of starting some new project, certainly not, because the moon is still on its dying cycle. I have talked about the eclipse at length in other videos, so I don't really want to go into too much detail about it. Though one other thing I should point out is that the sun is conjunct Chiron. In fact, this new moon eclipse is exactly conjunct Chiron. Exactly. That's perhaps one of the reasons people are excited about it. It's maybe about healing. Chiron is a wounded healer. Perhaps today and tomorrow there's something we can do to make the world better, to make people feel happier. If someone is upset about something, then maybe we can help. We should also consider the possibility that Chiron is about the maverick, someone who does things differently. And Chiron is associated with the maverick. I know some people have challenged that view, but Charles Cowell, who discovered Chiron, and I think he is an authority in the matter, or was an authority on the matter. It's his planet. He discovered it, so his view that it's a maverick, we should take that seriously. Of course, he was an astronomer. He wasn't talking about maverick from a psychological perspective. He was talking about Chiron's maverick orbit. But that word has stuck, and many of astrologers who are into Chiron have described it as a maverick planet, as doing things differently. And with Sun conjunct Chiron, Sun and Moon conjunct Chiron in Aries, that goes back to what I was saying about it being a time to take the initiative. We shouldn't be afraid to be different. We shouldn't be afraid to be a maverick and to stick out. Perhaps people need to see things from a different perspective. Another aspect going on today is that Venus is semisquare Jupiter. So Venus is exactly 45 degrees from Jupiter. Venus and Jupiter, the greater and lesser benefics. So as a pair, very fortunate planets. They're about things going our way. But they're in semisquare. And the downside of the benefics is that they can be too benefic. They can be too kind, too willing to please, perhaps too emotional. There may be a certain danger, for example, of over-generosity. Not necessarily financial generosity. Could be emotional generosity. Being a little too gushing. So, yes, it is a day for taking the initiative, but we need to think about what that initiative actually means. I'm not talking about being emotionally gushing. I'm not sure if that's the right approach today. You can be complimentary to people, but don't go over the top with Venus semisquare Jupiter. And there is a financial element to that Venus-Jupiter semisquare. Because it's a semisquare, because all things being equal, the semisquare is perhaps a difficult aspect. There may be a tendency to overspend or buy something that doesn't have to be spent. Buy something that doesn't have to be bought. So with that Venus semisquare Jupiter, I think a little bit of restraint is in order, but we should try to use that aspect in its best light. The Venus and Jupiter are in aspect, so we can be generous up to a point, provided we have limits on our generosity. If we decide to be generous, for example, if we decide to take the initiative, and that initiative includes generosity, to begin with, we must decide exactly in what way we're going to be generous and have a limit on that generosity so that it becomes a planned, generous action that doesn't go everywhere, but doesn't get out of control. I mean, I know that sounds a bit too controlling. I mean, something like generosity shouldn't have limits, but yes, I think it should have limits. Not because Saturn is involved. Saturn is a planet of limitations. It's just maybe I'm being the Saturn here. I'm just saying, be a bit careful there. Overall, the day is dominated by the build-up to the new moon eclipse, and possibly there isn't a great deal to say about it. There are a couple of midpoints that might be worth mentioning. Probably one midpoint in particular, and that's the Mercury-Mars midpoint. Jupiter is on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. Venus is also on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. So let me just show you what I mean. There's Mercury, there's Mars, and so the Mercury-Mars midpoint, you can see Venus is here. You can see how Venus is sort of in the middle, isn't it? Venus on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. Okay, so if you've got Venus on the hold on, let's find that again. There's Mercury, there's Mars. So we can see how Venus is going to be. Venus is 21 degrees approximately from Mars, and how it's approximately 21 degrees from Mercury. So so Venus is right in between Mercury and Mars. And Jupiter is semisquare Venus, so we can say that Jupiter and Venus are on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And Venus may be acting as a trigger. So the pair Mercury-Mars is about communicating, but it's also about communicating with power, Mercury-Mars. There are things we want to say, and we want to say them strongly. And I think that many of us, once we start communicating, we may not know when to stop, and we are able to communicate with force, and in certain cases with anger. I don't know if that's a good thing. It really does depend on the situation. But we do have to be aware of the power of our words. Our words can have a big impact. And if we get too angry about the wrong things, we might cause a bit of trouble. Maybe that's the right thing to do. I don't know. North Node is in Aries. And so maybe there are things to be said. Maybe we have to take people to task, tell them what they're doing wrong, and risk a big argument. But as I've just said, we do have to consider the situation. Is it really appropriate? And I want to very quickly look at the heliocentric picture. Heliocentric picture doesn't really tell us anything we don't already know, I don't think. Now, remember, there is a Sun conjunct Chiron today. So if we look at the heliocentric picture, there we are. Remember, this is looking at the solar system from a perspective of the Sun being in the middle of the solar system. We see that the Sun at Earth, there's Earth at 1918 Libra, is opposition Chiron at 1925 Aries. So by definition, if you have a conjunction with the Sun in a geocentric chart, it will be an opposition in the heliocentric chart. And so from a heliocentric perspective, we have Earth opposition Chiron. The Earth is also making a trine to Mars. That trine has been around for some time. It's starting to separate. How do we put that together? It reminds us that it may be time. Earth opposition Chiron, Earth trine Mars, Mars starting to move to a trine to Chiron. It may be a time that we need to actively intervene to help someone out or help a group of people out. And in the process, we may stick out because Chiron is the maverick. And it may not be easy to be the maverick. We may get criticism. But I think in this situation, it is the right thing to do. And when you're looking at a heliocentric chart, it's very impersonal. It may say something about the world at large. And look at how people are acting. Look at how people want to act. And you may notice that some people have an eccentric orbit. They're doing things that are strange. But you have to ask why. Don't prejudge people. Just because someone is acting strangely doesn't mean they're doing something wrong. They may be doing the right thing, and there may be, if you like, a method to their madness. And the method may be about healing, may be about somehow making the world a better place. So anyway, that's the heliocentric picture. What I want to do now, as usual, is look at what's going on today from the perspective of the 12 signs. Now, when I look at the 12 signs, I am going to be focusing a great deal on the new moon. And it's going to be, I think, a fairly simple message, because the new moon is kind of straightforward in a way. It is about a new beginning. There is going to be lots of new beginnings in terms of what I say for the 12 signs. Okay, right. These are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, April the 8th, 2024. Aries, you've got a lot of responsibility today, in the sense that the pressure is on you. And that pressure is to do something and to live up to your reputation. By reputation, I mean that Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It's the beginning. It's the initiative. It is the creative spirit. And with today's new moon eclipse, okay, it may be tomorrow depending on your time zone. With today's new moon eclipse, you have to start taking the initiative. And I think in some respects, it's an obligation. It's just something you're supposed to be doing. Though when I say initiative, it does so depend on your circumstance and what you're doing with your life. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be starting something huge like a revolution. It may not be about that. It may be about deciding you want to make a small change in your social life. It might be about telling something, maybe about making a single phone call, maybe about being honest. It does entirely depend on who you are, what your priorities are, and what your scope is. You know, when one does astrology in general, there's always a danger of hyperbole. Just saying stuff which is exaggerated. Because I suppose one wants to create a larger than life universe, but let's get real, let's be grounded about it. Consider what you can do and what is possible, and where you feel that you're moving outside your comfort zone. And I think that's really it. So an initiative is possibly valid if you are feeling that maybe it's slightly uncomfortable, you're wondering whether it's really the right thing to do, whether you've got enough energy, you're concerned about the reaction. But overall, it is very much something you need to get going on. Now, you don't need to have or get immediate results. The new moon eclipse, remember, if you're actually looking at that eclipse in, I don't know, wherever, Texas or wherever you can see it, there will be a moment where the sun appears to go dark. And new moon eclipses, new moons in general, are a bit about things happening in secret, the beginning of a process. And in many cases for you Aries, this initiative is about the beginning of a process. You're starting on something. It's not like you finish the whole move today or tomorrow or whenever this eclipse starts. It's about seeing it through for the next couple of weeks at least. So I'm hoping that that is something that you can be doing today, because I think it's going to be important. And actually, I do understand, but in some respects, you may not actually feel like it. So a lot of what I've said just now, you may be wondering whether that's really something you want to engage with. Because at some level, you just want to be yourself and you just want to be left alone. But I think you do have to recognize the responsibilities that come with the North Node being in your sign, being conjunct the sun and the moon. And we shouldn't forget Chiron. Chiron is the healer. Chiron is also the maverick. And it may be that some of the initiatives that you are expected to do, but expected by who? Expected by you, but actually not by anyone else. But some of the initiatives that are expected of you may involve helping someone, healing someone, perhaps using your own experience to help someone else. Finally, I should say something about relationships. Venus is the ruler of Libra, your opposite sign, and Venus is semisquare Jupiter. And I know that a lot of what I've said seems to be talking about you maybe being a little bit excessive, but what about other people? If Venus is semisquare Jupiter, someone you have to deal with on a one-to-one basis may actually be behaving in a rather excessive and over-the-top way. And they may be saying things that really get your attention. And you have to decide how best to deal with them. You might find them annoying. And you might even consider the possibility that they're making a mistake. And then you have to ask, do you interfere? Well, maybe you do interfere if someone is on the verge of making a mistake. They could be. If someone is spending too much money, even someone's behavior, if it's too excessive, maybe you have to intervene. But in a general sense, I think that some of the people close to you may be rather annoying and they may be irritating. But do be careful what you say, because just because someone is being annoying and irritating doesn't mean they're your enemy. In fact, they may be your friend, they may even be your ally. So what you don't want to do is upset someone just because you're annoyed, because then you might just unnecessarily fall out with someone, and I think that would be quite unnecessary. Taurus. I've just been talking about Venus being semisquare Jupiter. Venus semisquare Jupiter can be a little bit excessive. So don't take things too far today. So therefore, Taurus, consider your plans and make sure there are limits on them. So if you go into a new situation, try to think ahead a little and ask yourself, how far do you want to take it? And work out the limit, ideally, before you get involved. Because if you just get into a situation without thinking it through, you may start doing things which you really hadn't planned on doing. Now, that might be giving too much away on an emotional level. Venus semisquare Jupiter. Venus is your ruler. It's semisquare Jupiter, and at the moment Venus is in Aries. Venus in Aries is quite impulsive as ruler of Taurus, so you may do something or make a commitment, and perhaps you'll at a later stage realize that you have made a mistake. And the same perhaps applies to money. For some Taurians, there is a temptation to buy something. It looks good. Or spend money maybe in a restaurant or some form of entertainment, and it's money maybe you can't afford, or it's money you don't want to spend, the kind of money, but once you've spent it, there's going to be regrets. And that might be Venus semisquare Jupiter at work, just encouraging you or trying to encourage you to go too far. I would therefore suggest, Taurus, that you do exercise a bit of discipline. I mean, I know that you may not want to exercise discipline, but it might be a good idea. I should also say, Taurus, that you don't always have to be there, especially in a social sense. you can say no, and you can fall back on your own resources. That is okay, especially with today's new moon eclipse. This new moon eclipse, from a Taurean perspective, is actually quite private, and it reflects the parts of yourself and the parts of who you are that you don't necessarily want to reveal to the outside world. And maybe over the next few weeks, perhaps until the sun moves into Taurus, your birthday season is of course just around the corner, but you're not there yet. And maybe in the run-up to your birthday season, there are things you want to reflect on and perhaps not reveal to the outside world. Still, Venus is aspecting, in fact it's conjunct the Mercury-Mars midpoint today. And Jupiter is making a semisquare to Venus. So there are limits to how much you're going to want to keep yourself to yourself with Venus on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. Venus on the Mercury-Mars midpoint is someone saying something very strident. This may be already happening. I was reading the comments, and someone was commenting on my recent description of Taurus and actually called me whiny. That was Taurus, I assume, accusing me of being whiny. Okay, maybe I am whiny, at least for Taurans. And that would be perhaps Venus on the Mercury-Mars midpoint, feeling that you have to perhaps accuse something of someone of something. But if you are going to make an accusation, particularly a verbal accusation, whether you do it in writing, whether you say it to their face with Venus on the Mercury-Mars midpoint, you have to be careful. Taurus can be very blunt. And the words you use may not be carefully chosen. By the way, I'm not making any criticism of the person who made a comment about one of my last descriptions on Taurus. I like comments. I like negative comments. I like feedback. This is not a comment, so I'm not making any criticism there. But I'm just saying that today you do have to be careful what you say, because Taurian bluntness may go too far. And once you start criticizing something or somebody, it may be difficult to know when to stop. And one word too many could cause a fair amount of damage. Gemini. Yes, there is a new moon eclipse. It affects all of us, regardless of our sign. And I think with this new moon eclipse, you're going to be thinking about what you want. Not what you want in a material sense, in terms of status and power, but more what you want in terms of your hopes for the future, what you want for the world maybe, perhaps your ideals. They're going to be coming into play with this new moon eclipse. And you'll perhaps start to realize that money, status, power on its own just isn't enough, that you need something else, and that you need to be in an environment which accords with your own values and ideals. And so how do you actually get there? I think that part of getting there is associating with the right people. And there is a social element to this new moon. Sometimes Geminis can feel quite isolated. They feel sort of isolated in their thoughts and their ideas. They might take the view that no one else has these ideas, but that's not true. There are people who are like-minded, and with this new moon, I really do think that you should be trying to seek them out. You don't have to have immediate success, but it's the start of a process. You're sending feelers out, and sooner or later you will get a response. So it's just very important that you don't feel yourself to be alone, and you don't start getting heavily involved in private activities that you can't readily relate to the world out there. What you do is relevant to other people, and it is relevant to society, and I think you need to recognize that. And maybe there's a little bit of a warning there about Gemini arrogance. Remember, I'm a Gemini, so I'm not singling you out, but Geminis do have an arrogant streak. Geminis can think they're special, and it can take them a long time to realize they're not special. And I don't know, for me, probably it took me, I'm about to be 62, and I was well into my 50s. I think maybe when I turned 50, I started to realize that I really am not particularly special. I mean, you are special. Of course, we're all special. But there is a sense in which it's very important today not to feel too special. Because if you feel too special, or rather, if we too feel too special, maybe I'm projecting here, if so, apologies. But if we feel too special, then we may cut ourselves off from the outside world. And that's no good at all, especially with this new moon, but when we really do need to engage with the world out there. And I think what we need to do it in actually quite a dramatic way. We shouldn't restrict ourselves. We should really try to reach out to as large an audience as possible, and maybe with some kind of dramatic initiative, an initiative that may make us cringe a bit, but it might be the right thing to do, because the world needs someone like us, apparently. We've got something to offer, and today, not just today, over the next couple of weeks, we must be prepared to offer it. Because yes, we are needed, and if we were to keep everything to ourselves, well, that would be a shame, wouldn't it? Cancer. The new moon eclipse today is, I believe, quite important. It's in Aries, and from a Cancerian perspective, Aries is a very high-profile sign. It's about taking the initiative in a public setting, and it can be connected with career and work and business, I suppose politics, if you're into that kind of thing, politics, leadership. And this is the start of a new cycle for you, Cancer. And this new moon, whether it's today or tomorrow, remember it does slightly depend on your time zone when this new moon is. This new moon is a time when you need to accept your obligation to stand out and quite possibly take on a position of leadership. It may feel a bit much, and I don't think there is an immediate hurry, because new moons are just the beginning of a cycle. And at the very beginning of the cycle, we don't see much action. but then slowly but surely we start to see the full picture. Now, I understand, Cancer, that it may be a bit exhausting. And so what's happening on Monday today is that the moon is moving closer and closer to the sun. Quite when the sun and the moon are exactly on each other. Again, it does depend on your time zone, and it may be tomorrow. But as the moon moves towards this conjunction of the sun, you may feel a little bit exhausted. And having a high profile, taking a position of leadership, that kind of thing, may be absolutely the last thing you want to do. But it's this period of exhaustion, it's kind of a sense of preparation. This is the end of one lunar cycle. As you move into the new moon, as the moon finishes its waning period and starts to move towards its waxing period. So in this period of exhaustion, Cancer, you are in a way giving something up, you're releasing something, and it's okay it's okay not to do much, because you're taking stock of a new situation. But I think the moment the new moon becomes exact, I think that you're going to feel better. As the moon moves from a waning stage to a waxing stage, you will feel better, and I think that you will have a greater understanding of your responsibility. And in the first instance, I don't think there's necessarily much to do, but you know what you have to do. And perhaps what's really important about the new moon is the realizations you have. What's wrong with the world, what's right with the world, and where your part is. What is your part that you have to play? And so, Cancer, you also have to remember that Cancerians are really successful people. They can be really successful people. As I keep saying, some of the most successful people that ever lived were Cancerians. Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, okay, Elon Musk. Okay, you might have particular views on Elon Musk, but whatever you think of him, you can't deny the fact that he's successful. But okay, if you don't want to think about Elon Musk, you can think about Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. Cancerians are successful people, or rather they can be successful people. And perhaps this new moon eclipse should be reminding you of how successful you can be. Of course, success is relative, but I think you need to ask yourself, how do you want to be successful? How can you be successful? Be realistic, depends on your situation, but success is there for you. So decide on what you want to achieve. Decide what you have to do to achieve it. And I think over the next few weeks, you can start moving towards the realization of at least some of your short-term goals. Leo, you are starting to realize, if you haven't already, that there is a lot going on in the world, and also that the world is complicated. Now, when I say the world is complicated, I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean that there is a lot happening in the world, and the world has a lot to offer. And your own part of the world and your own experiences are not the whole story. And since the spring equinox, if you're in the northern hemisphere, I know it's beginning of autumn if you were in the southern hemisphere, but since the end of March, spring equinox, hopefully, Leo, you've been starting to realize how much is available for you. That you don't have to be satisfied with what you've got right in front of you. That there are other things going on which you need to take advantage of, and that you need to have an imagination. And you shouldn't be limiting yourself. And this new moon eclipse that we have today or tomorrow, depending on your time zone, really is about your horizons and accepting that your horizons are not limited. You need to go further and consider new possibilities. But this new moon is just a beginning, and you have to be sensitive. Look around you. Look at what is changing. Maybe you're going to notice things today with this eclipse that you hadn't noticed before. And you notice them and you're thinking, well, hold on, that's important. That could be the beginning of something new. So it's really important now and over the next few weeks not to limit yourself, because there is so much you can achieve. Certainly in an inspirational level and on a level of exposing yourself to new knowledge and new experiences. And that doesn't require a load of travel. The real changes are internal. Remember, a little bit of travel narrows the mind. You go somewhere with a load of prejudices, another part of the world, 3 weeks. You know, people like to do that. They like to travel. People are obsessed about travel. I think it's since COVID. People have always wanted to go somewhere, go to South America, wherever they feel it's really important. It's part of who they are. But that's just nonsense. The real travel, the travel that matters, does not need a plane trip or a boat trip. And you also have a certain and an increasing sense of morality creeping in. It's quite subtle, but this morality represents a feeling of what is right and wrong, but also a feeling that you are in a position to set yourself up as a little bit of an authority, almost like being a mini judge. And I suppose we shouldn't forget that from a Leo perspective, you know, we've got all these planets in Aries, and from a Leo perspective, these Aries planets can be somewhat judgmental. And I know that the word judgmental has somewhat negative connotations, that, you know, we should not be judgmental. It's you know, we should be open-minded. And in a way, everything I've been saying to you is all about being open-minded. But there is a place to be judgmental. And I'm thinking today, and I hope you don't feel that I'm contradicting myself here, but I think there is a time for Leos to be judgmental, and that time might actually be today. You see something that isn't right, or people not doing something, people behaving in the wrong way, and you feel an obligation to pass judgment. And you do pass judgment, and you say something that indicates you have a view and that you're ready to pronounce a judgment. And you do have to consider what your motives are, but in many cases it's the right thing to pass judgment. So Leo, bear that in mind. You've got to get it right. Don't just pass judgment for the sake of it. You don't want to dump your prejudices on someone. But there is also a sense of right and wrong today, which is absolutely valid. And maybe it's the right thing to do, to tell someone that they're doing something wrong, and to, I won't say throw the book at them, but of course, if you happen to be a judge or a police officer, of course, that's a different matter. Then if you're a judge or a police officer, then, well, particularly a judge, and you really are going to want to pass judgment. But yes, regardless of your situation, I think there is a place for judging people and situations. Okay, let's now move to Virgo. New moon today, Virgo. And I've talked about the new moon for everyone. And this new moon eclipse is somewhat insular. It's focusing on who you are and where you want to be. And it's going to occur to you, Virgo, that there are places that you actually don't want to be. And you're very clear about that. And suddenly you have a realization about what you like and what you don't like, with particular emphasis on what you don't like. And what you feel is wrong, what you feel is alien, is disturbing. And these feelings are strong. And I think they're quite valuable. Virgo, one of the keywords associated with Virgo when you're learning astrology, you learn these keywords for all the signs, at least what I did. I remember in the 80s you learn these keywords for the signs. I think one of the keywords that was associated with Virgo was discrimination. And I don't mean discrimination, of course, in the sense of discriminating against people. It is about discriminating about what is part of your world, what is not part of your world. And your feelings of dislike and uncomfortableness are going to be strong today. And if something is not part of your world, you're really going to feel it. And if someone is not part of your world, you're going to feel it. And it is a time to perhaps make a break. And making that break is probably something quite silent. You just know that something is not necessary, something doesn't make you feel comfortable, it maybe makes you feel angry, and so you don't really have to have anything to do with it. And that's okay. And you don't have to talk about it, really. You don't have to tell someone, I don't like you, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. You just have to quietly do your own thing and let perhaps a particular relationship drift off into the sunset. Also, Virgo, you need to accept the need for complication. Now, I know that complications are usually seen to be a bad thing, but complications are important sometimes. The world is not always simple, and there are times when you have to actually engage with the world and its complications, and I think that is something that's perhaps going to be happening today and over the next couple of weeks with the new moon eclipse. It's about being prepared to go under the surface. Look at things that other people don't want to deal with. Look at things that perhaps you have not wanted to deal with in the past. But I think you understand how important it is to get under the surface, because if you only deal with things at a surface level, then it's a symptomatic approach, isn't it? You deal with the symptoms, but you don't deal with the cause. And if you want to deal with the cause, you have to get deep down and you have to take the initiative to get deep down. You may feel that you need information. One thing I've learned in the United States is a big thing in the United States is public records requests. You bombard cities and municipalities with requests for public records. You give them a keyword and they have to search for it. They're legally obliged. And so maybe it's a time for making public records requests actively. I don't mean that sort of literally, if you're in America contacting your municipality for public records, but you have to take the approach that if you want to get to the bottom of the matter, you are going to have to actively get hold of information that is not readily available. And so with this new moon eclipse in Aries, you have to take the initiative there to get hold of what you need to get hold of. Finally, I should say a couple of things about relationships. 2 points. Firstly, in a couple of days' time, Mars will be making a conjunction to Saturn, and that Mars conjunction, this Mars-Saturn conjunction, does take place in Pisces, your opposite sign, and it could be quite difficult. And I know I've just said that you need to get rid of certain relationships, or you should consider getting rid of certain relationships if they're not doing you any good. But of course, there are always certain relationships we can't get rid of. And you may find that one particular person is starting to be difficult as reflected by that Mars-Saturn conjunction. Maybe something's bothering them. Maybe something's bothering them, and perhaps they're projecting their own concerns onto you. So ask yourself, are you being projected on? Is someone being difficult? How do you deal with it? Do you engage with someone's issues, or do you just get out of their way? Also, Venus is semisquare Jupiter. Jupiter does have relevance because Jupiter rules Pisces. Pisces is your opposite sign. A couple of people, maybe just one person, is behaving in a rather exaggerated way. And this might be annoying. And maybe this is actually why you are deciding that certain people and situations, you don't want to have anything more to do with them. But some people you just can't avoid. And so watch out for someone behaving in an exaggerated way. You may decide that you don't want to have anything to do with them, or you maybe want to stay out of their way temporarily. Of course, it's possible that you need to get them to calm down. You are able to show, by the way, real, powerful, focused anger if need be. Okay, maybe not just today, but tomorrow. You can show focused anger, which I think will get people to sit up and listen. They'll take the view, hey, Virgo is serious. We better be good. So, yes, Virgo, don't be afraid of showing focused anger. It can be very effective. Libra. I'm afraid that other people can't really be avoided over the next day or two. I mean, after all, we've got a new moon eclipse in Aries, your opposite sign. And I suppose it depends, doesn't it, what you want. It may be that you feel a little bit alone, and perhaps you feel you need company, the right kind of company, in which case I think that the eclipse is good news, because the new moon eclipse could bring someone new into your life. New people are available. The new moon represents a new cycle, and if you look around you, there are people out there who want to talk to you, want to know about you, and that could be very fortunate. So from a relationship perspective, yes, the new moon is important, and it is terribly important as well that you don't feel that you have to do everything on your own. You absolutely do not have to do everything on your own, Libra. You can get outside help, and it's there. You just have to ask. But I also should say that the new moon eclipse is going to shift the power equation maybe against you. I say against you because if you're the kind of person that likes to do everything your way, then you may have to accept that there are outside forces that just can't be avoided. And at the very least, you have to compromise. And if you don't compromise, then nothing is going to get done. And it will, I think, be the wrong thing to do. You have to remember that at the moment, the South Node is moving through Libra, your sign. The South Node is the line of least resistance. It's easiest to think about yourself and your own interests. It's not quite so easy to move into the North Node. The North Node is in Aries. It's about, to an extent, letting other people take the initiative, but of course not in such a way that you're overwhelmed. You have to be there. You have to be engaging with other people and how you relate to their various demands. So you have to be there. But I think that this new moon eclipse in general can be useful because you accept you can't do everything on your own and someone new is on the horizon. And also, if you're in an existing relationship, the relationship may be about to change. The dynamic is going to change. I think that over the next couple of weeks, it's probably going to be more important. If there's one single relationship to you that matters, then that single relationship is going to take up more of your time. And you have to get the balance right. You have to accept someone else's influence on your life, but also understand your own boundaries. And I think you have a good sense of your boundaries today in spite of everything, because Venus, which is your ruler, Venus rules Libra. Venus is conjunct the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And with Venus on the conjunct the Mercury-Mars midpoint, you will not mince your words. You will be an effective communicator, and you will be able to communicate with great power and great conviction. And I do think that people will listen to you. So what are you going to communicate about? Well, that might be part of how you establish your boundaries, telling people quite clearly what's okay and what's not okay. That's sort of in a negative sense. In a positive sense, with Venus on conjunct the Mercury-Mars midpoint, you're going to be able to articulate a particular vision, helped by the fact that Jupiter is currently semisquare Venus. You're able to articulate a clear vision of what you want. And I think that your vision will be understood. And once you have declared a vision of what you want, then you're in a position where you can perhaps start to negotiate this vision. I mean, I know visions aren't really supposed to be negotiated. Visions, you just have to take the whole thing. This is the vision. But in this case, a bit of negotiation might be required, might be useful. And perhaps you and the important people in your life can decide what you all want and decide what kind of vision you want to move towards. So overall, you cannot avoid this new moon eclipse. I think it's very important for you, and you just have to get the balance right. You certainly don't want to be overwhelmed by any one person or indeed by any group of people. You've got to stand up for yourself, but up to a point. There is a lot of negotiation, I think, coming up. If not today, then tomorrow and over the next couple of weeks between now and the new moon, and perhaps even further. Scorpio, you do feel that things could be a bit better. I mean, I've generally talked about this new moon eclipse today in a fairly positive way, but I think from your perspective, the new moon eclipse may be a little bit annoying. I mean, it's going to focus on what you have to do. I mean, there's no doubt about that. You'll see what's wrong with the world. It'll be very clear. And no one really wants to see what's wrong with the world. I mean, that's distressing, isn't it? I mean, it would be great if everything was fine. We lived in a wonderful world where everyone was being nice to each other. But you will see what is wrong, and you have to focus first on what you're able to control. Scorpio is a sign that does like to focus on control. And so consider the limits of your control and start there. And make sure that everything you can change easily is changed. Once you've made the changes around you in that immediate world which you can control, then you can start thinking about the world out there. And you will then be in a position where you're acting with authority, because you don't want to be seen as being a hypocrite. Slight danger of hypocrisy there. Not sorting out yourself and then expecting other people to fall into line when you're not fully sorted out yourself. But it shouldn't be a problem. There shouldn't be any risk of hypocrisy if you start work on yourself. And that's what I think you need to do with this new moon eclipse today or tomorrow, depending on your time zone. There are some things that need to be sorted out. You've known this for a couple of weeks, and I think with the new moon, I think you're just really ready to engage with it. But I'm not saying it has to be a completely serious day. There is a lightness to you at some level, and I think that you will appreciate a bit of social variety. You don't want to be stuck with the same people, and perhaps you'll feel that you need someone else in your life, even for 5 minutes. And if you make the effort, you will have quite a friendly, even gregarious approach. And the people will like you, and you will come over as being interesting. And if someone else is interesting, I think that you will be able to bring it out. And I think you do have a capacity today for bringing out the best in people. And so doing that is just going to make you feel better. So if you can bring out the best in one other person, Scorpio, I think that would be really good. Now, Scorpio, one reminder. In 2 days' time, on Wednesday, there is a conjunction between Mars and Saturn. So Mars is your ruler. Mars is now less than 2 degrees from Saturn. And I think many Scorpios are starting to feel the impact of this conjunction, feeling that in some ways you're being restricted. There are things you'd like to do, maybe of a creative nature, and you're feeling that you just can't quite do it, but something is holding you back. Maybe you feel that it's other people holding you back. And it's important that you don't get too worked up about it, because this Mars-Saturn conjunction becomes exact on Wednesday. And very often in astrology what happens is that you labour under a particular aspect, and it gets more difficult as the aspect starts to move towards exactitude. And then the aspect becomes exact, and it can be a great sense of relief. And so with this build-up to the Mars-Saturn conjunction on Wednesday, don't take it to heart if you feel you can't do everything you want to do. And certainly do not give up on anything. This may be a moment of maximum difficulty. And if you can just keep going for the next couple of days, you may actually crack the problem. So, got to be positive there, because you are a very creative person and you can achieve a great deal. And if you're working on something, this is just the hardest bit, and you're perhaps nearly there. Sagittarius. Today, Sagittarius, Venus makes a semisquare to Jupiter, and this semisquare to Jupiter, it's a bit of a mixed blessing, really. So Jupiter is Jupiter's your ruler. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and Venus is making a semisquare. Now, Venus is a nice planet of relationships, but it's making a semisquare. What does that mean? One interpretation of this semisquare means that you're going to be very sociable. Your social skills are going to be very good. It's like Venus and Jupiter are running in the same direction. And so there are people out there who you can talk to, relate to, and this will help you to enjoy life. But you could also say that Venus represents a particular person who you find somewhat annoying. They just irritate you. Maybe their way of doing things just isn't your way of doing things, or you look at how they express themselves and you're not very comfortable with it, and they seem to be threatening your sense of order. Yeah, even Sagittarians have a sense of order. I know that Sagittarians have a reputation for perhaps being a little bit chaotic, but at the moment Sagittarians do put a high premium on order, and you might find that there is one particular person who seems to be attacking that order. Do consider what it is about. It may be someone who doesn't know any better. They may be young and immature. They don't really understand the impact of what they're doing, and it may be a situation where you have to be a bit tolerant. Yes, I think that tolerance really is important. Finally, another final way of looking at Venus semisquare Jupiter, it could be about money. And with Venus semisquare Jupiter, risk of over-expenditure and over-indulgence. I'm saying this for all signs. I'm not singling you out in particular, but because Jupiter rules Sagittarius, I just have to give you that warning there. But we can't deny that the main thing going on today is a new moon eclipse, and it's in Aries, a fire sign. And of course, being a Sagittarius, you are a fire sign. And this does mark, in some respects, a new beginning for you. And it should be a new beginning for you. It should be a creative new beginning for you, when you can start really considering what you can do, because you can do an enormous amount. I think this has become increasingly apparent since the spring equinox, or I understand if you're in the southern hemisphere it's the beginning of autumn, but since the spring equinox, when the sun moved into Aries, you have become quite focused on what you can do, or at least you should have been focused on what you can do, and a new moon really brings it out. And it becomes clear what kind of impact you can have. It starts in your own private world, It doesn't need to be shouted about. That's so important. The beginning, perhaps, of a new project. In fact, Sagittarius, it's a great time for starting a new project. It can be very spectacular in the end. But to begin with, there's no need to talk about it. Because if you talk about it and you engage other people, they're just going to get in your way. And right now, I think you need a bit of space to get everything sorted out. Finally, I should point out that this Venus semisquare Jupiter is aspecting the Mercury-Mars midpoint. I've talked about this for quite a few of the signs, and I'm certainly going to talk about it for you, because with this aspect to the Mercury-Mars midpoint, it's quite verbal, and the things you say could really hit home. And we shouldn't forget that the stereotypical Sagittarian is pretty tactless, and you're going to say things which are very honest, or at least you could say things that are honest, things that are very honest, if you just do what you want to do. But honesty, is honesty a virtue? It's usually a virtue, but not always a virtue. Don't be too honest, because you don't want to cause needless upset, especially now when you've got this new moon eclipse. New moon eclipse, yes, it's talking about new beginnings, but it's about new beginnings taking place very often in the darkness. And by talking too much, by saying things that get people's attention, you may be acting out of accord. You may be acting in a way that conflicts with the atmosphere of the day, and you may stand out, and you may stand out in a way that is not particularly useful. Capricorn. In a way, Capricorn, you are doubling down. You know what you want. You know what makes you feel comfortable, and that's the way you want to keep it. And today or tomorrow's new moon eclipse really does reinforce it. You don't want to engage too heavily with the outside world. You're very comfortable where you are. You've got it all sorted out. And if you are engaging with the outside world, I think, as far as you're concerned, it should be on your terms. And I don't think this is a bad thing. Remember, Capricorn is an earth sign. It's all about stability and grounding. At least it should be. Of course, we do have exceptions. We think Janis Joplin was a Capricorn, wasn't she? But with the North Node in Aries, then I'm really thinking that it is about actively grounding yourself, particularly today and tomorrow, because you've got this new moon in Aries. And if something isn't stable, something isn't certain, then as far as you're concerned, you need to take action to remove the uncertainty. And I think that's what you can do. And I think a lot of your attention could be on stuff like real estate, on things that you own, on your fixed assets, on things that are going to secure you over the next few years, decades, probably for the rest of your life. That's how you're thinking. I mean, Capricorn is quite a long-term sign, and it's okay to take a long-term view. And therefore, Capricorn, really focus on creating this long-term view, creating long-term security for yourself, and not allowing yourself to be distracted. Sure, there'll be distractions, but I don't think that you have to take these distractions particularly seriously. If you want to ignore something or someone that is annoying, I think you're absolutely free to do that. And you are able to close something down. Maybe something needs to be closed down today. Something that is a little bit out of control, a little bit chaotic, possibly regarding other people, commitments to other people, something you find unsettling, and you're in a position to close it down. People might not be happy about it, but it may be something you feel needs to be done. And yeah, you might not make yourself popular, but what matters is creating stability. That's the main thing. And whatever steps you have to take to create stability and certainty and predictability should be welcomed, and they are nothing to be ashamed about. Finally, I should point out that on Wednesday there is a conjunction between Mars and Saturn. So Saturn is your ruler. Mars is moving towards a conjunction with Saturn. And this conjunction is getting very close. And I will be talking about it tomorrow, and I will be talking about it Wednesday. I'm not going to stop talking about it. And I might, in fact, sound repetitive. I may be saying these words again tomorrow. Just to remind you, Mars can be quite a difficult and aggressive force. If it's approaching Saturn right now, then I would recommend a certain amount of caution. Caution when dealing with other people, particularly if they're people who've got a reputation and got a history, a form of being annoying and aggressive. People don't change. So if someone's been a problem in the past, they're likely to be a problem in the future. And so if someone is starting to worm their way into your life who fits that bill, then possibly you should take steps to make sure they go away. Mars conjunct Saturn can also be about accidents. Now, I take the view as an astrologer that I need to look at things from the absolute most negative point of view. Now, you may disagree with that, but when I'm doing someone's chart, for example, I'd like to tell them about the worst possibility that can possibly happen, that I can see if it fits the symbolism. So Mars conjunct Saturn, we do have the symbolism of an accident. Now, I'm not saying an accident is going to happen, but what I am saying is the probability of accidents goes up with Mars conjunct Saturn, at least a probability in terms of the symbolism. Maybe not in a statistical sense. In fact, certainly not in a statistical sense. But with Mars moving to the conjunction of Saturn, you have to be careful. Do not do anything dangerous. It is not a good time to be rock climbing. Not a good time to be flying planes unless you are a very experienced professional qualified pilot with a well-maintained plane. It's just a time not to be taking risks. And risks is also about hanging out with people who've done bad things in the past. So avoid risk over the next few days. Completely de-risk yourself if you can. If you're driving, be careful. Do you need to drive? Apparently the roads are getting worse and worse and people are driving in a more and more crazy way. Do you have to drive over the next couple of days? If you don't have to, well, don't bother. Don't save yourself the aggravation. So I'm sorry to be negative about that Mars conjunct Saturn, and I'm just looking at it from the absolute worst possible perspective. But I think it's just part of my obligation to just warn you about that. And really, that's it. And today, tomorrow, it's all about creating maximum security for yourself. Aquarius. If you were listening to me, Aquarius, when I was talking to Capricorn, I was warning Capricorn about accidents and not doing anything dangerous. I'd say exactly the same thing to you, because Mars is making a conjunction to Saturn. Saturn does not just rule Capricorn, it also rules Aquarius. So be careful. Don't do anything stupid. Don't take risks. It's unnecessary. Also, don't take risks with money. I don't think. I'm not giving financial advice here, for entertainment purposes only, this video. But don't take excessive risks with money. Be very careful, for example, in terms of, walking down the street. Don't advertise what you own. Don't walk down the streets with wads of cash in your hand, or with an expensive cell phone in your hand. Just avoid any risk of financial loss. That would be, I think, a good idea. And I'm just starting that because that's how I ended with Capricorn, so I'm just reinforcing it. But that aside, I think that today is quite useful. I think it's quite interesting with this eclipse. This eclipse is about how you express yourself. Remember, this eclipse is not the new moon eclipse is not necessarily just about today. It's about tomorrow as well. It's about how you express yourself and how you relate to your immediate environment. For you, this eclipse may be about community and about your immediate neighborhood. I am in America. People go on and on about community. I don't actually think there is much community here in America, but people like to use the word community. It's just a word, really. But I suppose there's always a potential of community. And you do need to think, for example, about who you live next to. Who lives across the road? Who are they? Have you ever talked to them? If you're at work, who do you work next to? Again, do you ever talk to them? And with this new moon eclipse, which is the beginning of something, maybe that's something you need to start to think about. How do you relate to all of the people around you? Perhaps there is scope for conversation and cooperation with neighbours or workmates. And it will be down to you to take the initiative. But that shouldn't be a problem, because at the moment, Aquarius, you are quite communicative. Or let me rephrase that. You may not feel yourself to be communicative, but actually you have developing skills in the communication department, which will become apparent as soon as you start to exercise these skills. And it might not be easy, but you have a chance of really helping someone. We shouldn't forget that this new moon eclipse is conjunct Chiron, and Chiron can be about healing and helping. Perhaps you've been through a particularly difficult time, maybe not now, but maybe decades ago, and that experience has given you a particular knowledge, particular skill set even. And perhaps when you engage with the people around you and look at what's bothering them, then you might be reminded of what has bothered you in the past. Hence the concept of the wounded healer. But the wounded healer being applied perhaps to your community and what you can do in your community. And in a sense, you can make the world a better place, or at least you can make your small part of the world a better place. Though, Aquarius, I do understand that not everyone is going to get on with you. Some people are not going to like your particular approach. It just can't be avoided. Aquarius, it's a fixed sign. It has a particular way of doing things, and you absolutely cannot expect everyone to appreciate your way of doing things. There is going to be a little bit of resistance in some quarters, but I don't think that should bother you. It's all about making it clear who you are, and making perhaps it clear that you are around, you're available, you're there to listen, you're there to help, and that's all it takes. Just introduce yourself, and that should be enough. And that, I think, is perhaps what you should be doing. And you shouldn't be too ambitious with this new moon eclipse. It's tempting to think about big ideas, big concepts, even to think about things in a sort of political sense and idealistic sense. I don't think that's the right approach. It all starts where you are. It starts with your immediate community. Forget. Okay, I don't say forget, but don't get too worried about what's happening in Tibet or in Gaza or in Ukraine. Well, unless you live in Tibet, Gaza, or Ukraine. But if you don't live in Tibet, Gaza, or Ukraine, or Congo, all these parts of the world where terrible things are happening, what actually matters is your own community. And I suppose in that sense, charity begins at home. I don't want to sound selfish, but yes, charity does begin at home. Your home, as in your immediate community. That's what matters. Pisces. As you know, there is a total eclipse of the sun. It takes place today or tomorrow, depending on your time zone. And we have to ask, how is it going to affect you? Well, from a Pisces perspective, this new moon eclipse does actually fall in Aries, which can be quite a financial sign. Again, from the perspective of a Pisces, that's because Aries is the sign after Pisces. And it may be that there are things that need to be done in a financial sense. I'm not saying that your financial situation is bad. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that there is an initiative that needs to be contemplated. And I should also say I'm not giving financial advice here. This video is for entertainment purposes only. But there seems to be something that needs to be done financially which could be quite important, that could help move things along. And you need to keep it simple. Just something simple. Maybe it's about seeing that you've got something wrong financially, or that you're spending too much in one area. One little change can make a big difference. Now, when you consider that change right now, it might not be immediately apparent what it is. But this is a new moon. This is the beginning of something. And over the next couple of weeks, it might become clearer what needs to be done. And don't allow yourself to complicate the situation. It's very easy when you're dealing with money to think about all sorts of reasons why you can't do something. The reasons just pile up, and fundamentally there's very often a psychological reason, which is you just can't be bothered. It's like you don't want to deal with the complication, and it's a little bit frightening, so you better just back off and do something else. But I think today it would be a good idea if you were to engage. And so I don't want to tell you what to do or go any further than that. You have to consider the situation. I'm just raising a possibility there with this new moon eclipse. Another thing happening today, which needs to be mentioned, is the fact that Venus is making a semisquare to Jupiter. And this Venus semisquare Jupiter is on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. So this could have a number of manifestations. I think with Venus semisquare Jupiter could have a financial manifestation, because as I've been saying to a lot of the signs, beware of over expenditure. Venus and Jupiter, the two, Venus the lesser benefic, Jupiter the greater benefic, very optimistic, generous signs, and you put them together with a 45-degree aspect, and you may be encouraged to spend more money than you actually want to spend. Okay, at the time you might spend the money, but afterwards you realize you made a mistake. So that's one possibility. And also Venus semisquare Jupiter. Venus may represent someone who you feel uncomfortable with. At least for today, you might feel uncomfortable with them. They might just be annoying. They may grate. They may be sort of infringing on your boundaries. So Pisces, when you're getting involved with other people, if you're getting involved with other people, try to think it through. Do you need to get involved with certain people? Because once you start getting involved, it may be difficult to stop the involvement. And when I say involvement, it could be at any level. You know, you make a phone call to someone, you want to just have a 1-minute phone call to ask them how they are, and you end up spending 2 hours on the phone. That's not what you want to do. So consider how social involvements could get out of hand, and a bit of pre-planning might be a good idea. Another way in which the Venus-Jupiter semisquare could be working out is the fact that it is on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And Jupiter, so you've got Jupiter, your ruler, is semisquare the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And that can be quite verbal. It actually can be quite verbally aggressive. And so you put Venus on the Mercury-Mars midpoint as well, and you're capable of saying things which get a reaction. You're capable of being quite offensive with your words, not just the spoken words, how you communicate through email, text message, whatever. And so you have to be aware of that capacity. This capacity is not good or bad. It depends what you do with it. So your words can be powerful. They can be dangerous. They can be destructive. It's rather up to you what you say. So I suppose I have to say, think carefully before you insult people. Do you want to insult people? Indeed, you might not intend to insult people, but something you say which you feel you want to say might go down the wrong way. It depends. But on the other hand, it's sometimes good to get things out into the open and to be very clear about what you like, what you don't like. And if you want to criticize people, if you feel you have to criticize people, well, maybe today might be the day for doing it. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, looking at today from an astrological perspective. I am now going to turn to the I Ching and look at the day from the perspective of that, see if there's any difference. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got, looks bad, it is 29. It's the abysmal. It's not quite as bad as it looks, though. The abysmal represents the abyss, a big hole in the ground, something we could fall into, something quite dangerous. So the question is, how do we deal with this, and what's it all about? We have to be careful. There are literally a lot of pitfalls today. And if we're not careful, we could get very stuck. And it might actually happen. We might be in a situation that is difficult and we can't just get out of it. Maybe we do fall in the hole, fall in a pit. And so if we're in a difficult situation, don't just do the first thing that comes to mind. Feel you have to do anything to get out of it. It may be a situation where you have to wait it out a little. You have to be patient. And if you're stuck, you're stuck. And sometimes if you were trying to release yourself in a chaotic kind of way, then you're just going to get even more stuck. So it might be a good idea to just wait, and to wait for the situation to resolve. And that is the first moving line. The third line here, it does move. And then the fifth line moves. And this is an indication that something is really dangerous. It's like something is filling up to the brim without overflowing, but not quite. It doesn't quite go all the way. So it's about being in a situation that is dangerous, but we are able to escape just in time. And then the top line is still about being stuck. There's associations with courthouses and prisons, and we can't get through a thorny hedge or a thorny plants. I think Greg Winkup talks about thorny dates, the date plants. I didn't know that dates had thorns, but getting really stuck and not being able to get out of a situation easily. And that is the overall picture. There seems to be a situation that we're in that is difficult, and we can't get out of it easily. And we need a lot of patience. If we try to get out of it too soon, then we just make matters worse for ourselves. And this is all happening on the day of a new moon eclipse. New moon is very often a time where actually we shouldn't be taking action. We should quietly start to understand the situation around us before taking action. And maybe this is what the abysmal is also about. It's probably nothing you don't know already. So what is that situation where you feel a bit stuck, where you can't make a move? Then the abysmal moves, and it actually moves to the same hexagram that I had when I looked at this whole week. And that hexagram it moves to is hexagram 18, which Greg Winkup calls illness, which Wilhelm calls work on what has been spoilt. A commenter on this channel called it repair. And I think repair is actually a good word to use for this. I like the word repair because it's not quite so negative as illness. Because what we mean by illness is not just any illness, it's an illness that can be cured. And so again, with repair, something needs to be fixed, or like work on what has been spoiled, something needs to be sorted out. So going back to the previous hexagram of the abysmal, it's a difficult situation. We can't get out of it easily. But this hexagram does indicate that really there are things we can do to cure the problem, to deal with the problem, to repair the problem. And that's what we have to engage with. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take some time. But I think that we should be able to solve the problem. And just a reminder that this is a hexagram for today. Tomorrow there'll be a different hexagram, so that's what I was asking. I was asking, what is Monday going to be like? I wasn't asking, what are the next 10 years going to be like? So do consider what needs to be fixed, and just handle it in the right way, and I think that things should be okay. Now I want to go back to the astrology, and I want to talk about P. Diddy. Now, I warn you, I don't know anything about him. I'm sure you know more about him than me. So I'm just looking at his chart from an astrological... I'm just looking at the chart, that's all. I do know he's fantastically successful. He's a record producer. He's record executive, rapper. He's been involved in lines of clothing. He's very sociable. He's been associated with parties, and even right at the beginning of his career, he was able to organize huge parties. He's that kind of person. Other people have been associated with him with this latest thing, but I think Prince Harry's been connected with him. I'm not quite sure what that connection was about. And let's look at his chart. So Sean Combs is the same as P. Diddy, which is the same as Diddy. I think he's not allowed to use the word Diddy in England because of some copyright, some trademark. I don't know the details, but he has to use, hence P. Maybe that's why P. Diddy. And Puff Daddy, that's another name. So he's got quite a few names. And this is his chart set for noon. First thing to note is that he's a Scorpio. Sun in Scorpio, Mercury in Scorpio, Neptune in Scorpio. To begin with, that doesn't immediately connect with someone who is wildly sociable, just looking at Scorpio, especially as he's got Mercury opposition Saturn. I mean, that really grabs us, doesn't it? Mercury opposition Saturn. Mercury is very, very structured there with that opposition to Saturn. Now, given what we know about him and how successful he is, I suppose we could say that might be about hard work. In spite of the chaotic reputation and the parties and the recent suggestions, remember, what's her name? Cassie Ventura was talking about a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking. That's quite an allegation. Mercury opposition Saturn does suggest some kind of work ethic there. And this Mercury opposition Saturn may be about how he communicates. So if you are a rapper, it's all about how you use your words, how you express those words, and I suppose you must need a certain amount of mental self-discipline. I mean, you can't be like me, can you? I'm just sort of all over the place with what I say. You know, I could never be a rapper because I'd start talking about something else, and I wouldn't be very focused. I don't have a Mercury opposition Saturn in my chart, so if you're a rapper, it may actually be quite useful to have Mercury opposition Saturn, because you have to use words very precisely. It might seem spontaneous, but you do need to have self-discipline, I think, or some sense of discipline there, I would have said, to be a successful rapper. I know everyone raps, but I think in fact, I'm sure that the Mercury opposition Saturn has something to do with it. This Mercury opposition Saturn is semisquare. Is semisquare the nodal axis, and again, having the node semisquare Mercury is about communication. it is about networking. Let's leave Saturn behind for the moment. If you've got Mercury North Node, if you take the North Node from a German perspective, the Eberton school or the Uranian school, Mercury is about network. Sorry, the nodes are about network. You put Mercury with the nodes, you get someone who is potentially an effective networker. You put Saturn there as well, okay, that gives perhaps a different flavour to the thing. Mercury opposition Saturn, semisquare the node, at times difficult contacts with other people. And if you look at the Wikipedia page, there's just been lawsuits, all sorts of lawsuits, all sorts of stuff. It just goes on and on. And I don't have his timed horoscope so we can't be precise about where this is being manifested. But difficult contacts with other people. Mercury opposition Saturn is very verbal. If you've got Mercury opposition Saturn, you can be very cutting with your words. You can be quite unpleasant with what you say. And you can imagine how all this sort of gets connected with lawsuits. And so that may be how it's working. But again, you probably know more about P. Diddy than me, so you can piece it all together. Say something in the comments. Moon in Virgo, I suppose if you want to be a rapper, it probably helps to be Moon in Virgo, being very precise, being very clear. It's very financially orientated, having Moon in Virgo, particularly if it's trine Saturn, and he is very successful in terms of building up an empire, a business empire. But what I haven't mentioned so far is his Venus-Jupiter conjunction. That Venus-Jupiter conjunction is really quite special. Venus is very strong. It's in Libra, its own sign. It is conjunct Jupiter. Venus-Jupiter conjunction, very simply, is lucky. Venus is the lesser benefic, Jupiter is the greater benefic. Together, they are just plain lucky. And I know that's a big generalization, and I suppose there's plenty of scope for squandering one's luck, but it's a good start to be born with Venus conjunct Jupiter. And we've talked about his sociability, his capacity to have these huge parties. At the beginning of his career, he was able to have huge parties. He's very well connected, highly sociable. Venus conjunct Jupiter. So here we're sort of moving away from that Scorpio. Certainly on the surface, I think that Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Libra is telling us more than all that stuff in Scorpio. But there's something else about that Venus conjunct Jupiter which is not immediately apparent. So I'm now going to make this chart a whole lot more complicated, and I'm going to add some stuff. And I'm always careful adding stuff. I don't want to just hold on. Let me go back to that chart. That's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. So what I want to do is make one change. I want to throw in some of the hypothetical planets. So I know it's a mess, but if you look at his chart now, you see this glyph here. That is Cupido, the hypothetical planet Cupido, and it's at 2143 Libra. It is conjunct Jupiter at 2158 Libra, and it's conjunct Venus. So he's got Cupido is thrown into this conjunction. Now, if you are using hypothetical planets, you need to use very tight orbs, because if you don't use tight orbs, it just becomes a complete mess. You can see how much of a mess the chart already is. Now I've added all those hypothetical planets. But the thing is that Cupido is within 1 degree of Jupiter and Venus. And Cupido, as a planet, is very much connected with union. and community and contacts. And so Cupido thrown into the Venus-Jupiter conjunction makes it even more so. It just makes it such that here is someone who's got fantastic social skills with that Cupido. And that Cupido is almost out of control. When you're dealing with these hypotheticals, they are almost like they are transpersonal. They're these collective energies that are almost rather frightening. And Cupido is certainly helping him network with all sorts of different people and must have an important role in his success. So in this case, I think we really can look at Cupido. So that's one planet I wanted to point out. Another planet I wanted to consider was Zeus. So here's Zeus. Zeus at 11-4 Virgo. So on the surface, not much going on there. Just so what? It's in Zeus at 11 Virgo. But then I want to consider his Venus and his Mars. So there is his Venus, there is his Mars. Now, I don't have a time of birth, but I think that Venus and Mars are moving sufficiently slowly to be considering their midpoint. And so the midpoint of Venus and Mars is going to be around 11, something like 11 Sagittarius. So that means that he's got Zeus on his Venus-Mars midpoint. And I want to consider what that means in terms of some of the allegations made against him. Remember, Cassie Ventura, remember to say again, is talking about the cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking. And there's been a lot of allegations about his sexual misconduct. I mean, I don't think he's been found guilty. He hasn't been found guilty of anything. But Zeus, if you look at Zeus mythologically, Zeus is a planet that, sorry, not a planet, Zeus, the god Zeus is very promiscuous. He likes to appear in different forms in order to have his way with particular women. I mean, you probably know more about the mythology of it than me. Young women, he would just appear. And so Zeus, from a sexual perspective, is pretty promiscuous. And so that's how we need to think about Zeus. And he's very fast. Zeus would suddenly appear, have his way with a woman, and then disappear again. Usually sometimes he would change his form. And so that's how we might see Zeus in a general sense. But then he's got Zeus square the Venus-Mars midpoint. So Zeus on the Venus-Mars midpoint may say a great deal about his sexuality and his perhaps promiscuity, and maybe how he treats some of the women around him. So I think that the Zeus on the Venus-Mars midpoint could be working like that. Although I think Zeus on square Venus-Mars in general would give him a certain amount of charisma. Zeus is a very powerful planet. You know, it can be associated with weapons. Zeus, maybe that's part of the image, but I haven't gone into the details here. But that's one association: warfare, weapons, great power, and it's on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So perhaps Zeus on the Venus-Mars midpoint has, of course, helped him bring to bear the power of his personality. So there are other ways of looking at it, but I thought that the Zeus on the Venus-Mars midpoint was interesting. Now we have the question about what is going on at the moment for him, because he seems to be in the news all the time. I don't really read the news articles, but I know people are interested in him. So I wanted to just look at his solar return for this year to start with. Let me just remove the hypothetical planets. You have to be really careful with hypothetical planets because you don't want to just use them just for the sake of it, and you need to use really tight orbs. Even a degree may be too much. Maybe half a degree would be ideal, but I think Cupido, Venus, Jupiter is really saying so much about him, perhaps as a party animal, someone who's able to organize things, organize a community around him. Okay, let's just remove this stuff. Let's have a simpler chart. There we go. And let's look at his solar return for 2023. Remember, I do not have a time of birth for him. So you could argue that the solar return is of limited value, but it's quite a strong solar return because at the time of his solar return, there is his sun. This is November the 4th, 2023. Now, Cassie Ventura, she made her complaint on November the 16th, 2023. Which was only 4 days after the solar return. And there's the sun moving to a conjunction of Mars. So there's about to be trouble. That seems to be quite clear. Also, the sun is opposition Jupiter. And so sun opposition Jupiter, we know that there's a certain sense of excess. And the moon, we don't know exactly where the moon is, but the moon is, okay, it could be anywhere from 0 degrees Leo to 12 degrees Leo, but the moon is applying to the square of Jupiter, it's probably applying to the square of the sun, and eventually it will make the square to Mars. So there are hints of problems in his solar return. Also, Venus opposition Neptune. That doesn't help. Venus is about relationships, Neptune is about confusion and just perhaps deception. So Venus opposition Neptune could be a bit difficult. And we also notice in his solar return, it's not specific to the solar return, of course Pluto is at 28 Capricorn. So going back to P. Diddy's natal chart, he's got Mars at 2957 Capricorn. So Pluto, as it moved towards the sign Aquarius, he had Pluto conjunct his Mars. And he's got Pluto conjunct his Mars this year. Remember, at the end of the year, Pluto briefly leaves Aquarius, goes back into Capricorn, and will conjunct his Mars. Okay, we don't know. With his Mars, by the way, we don't know what sign his Mars is in. He could have Mars in the last degree of Aquarius, he could have Mars in the last degree of Capricorn. We don't know for sure, but we do know that around now he does have Pluto conjunct his Mars. Pluto conjunct Mars could be a struggle for survival. It is difficult, it is a struggle. He's trying to assert himself, but there are powerful forces out to get him. Finally, there are his solar arc directions. So with a solar arc direction, one is moving the planets 1 degree for every year. And there are a couple of interesting things in his solar arc direction. So here is his solar arc directions set for, well, these are December the 29th, 1969. So that means you're moving the sun and everything else. How old would he be? He's born in 69, so he's going to be, on his last birthday, he would, be 54? Is that right? I don't know, something like that. 69, so that would be, he would be 55 in 24, so he's just turned 54. But anyway, you move the planets 54 degrees. Every single planet gets moved 54 degrees. And then you compare it to the natal chart to see what you can find. So in the middle, we've got P. Diddy's natal chart. Outer wheel, we've got his solar arc directions. Now, one solar arc direction that I want to focus on, there are but 3 which could be of significance. First, his solar arc directed Mars is at 25 Pisces, and his Pluto is at 2633 Virgo. So Mars is applying to his Pluto. That is, okay, that might not be exact, but it's coming up. So with Mars opposition Pluto, that reinforces the fact that he's got transiting Pluto conjunct his Mars. It's a real Mars-Pluto time for him. That struggle for survival really is there. He's going to have to really engage to get through this. A lot of power is flying around, and I would have thought that his enemies are strong. Another thing going on is his solar arc directed Neptune. So there's his solar arc directed Neptune, and it is square Venus. So over the last year or two, he's had solar arc directed Neptune square his Cupido Venus Jupiter conjunction. And so that's very much who he is. His strengths are represented by that Venus Jupiter Cupido conjunction. So with Neptune square it, he's having to deal with the consequences of it all, and it's all becoming a bit chaotic, and it's all leaking out, and he perhaps is being undermined by it. But the most significant direction is this. Let me show you. Remember, he's got a Mars-Saturn opposition in his horoscope. And if we direct the Mars-Saturn opposition around 54 degrees, Saturn is directed to 0 degrees Capricorn, 0 degrees Cancer, and Mercury is directed to 0 degrees Capricorn. So in other words, his Mercury-Saturn opposition is directing to the 0 degrees Capricorn point, to the solstice point, which is square the Aries point. Or put simply, the Mercury-Saturn, his exact Mercury-Saturn opposition is directing to the Aries point, to a square of the Aries point. The Aries point is the world at large. It's his public. And it's Saturn and Mercury. He sees the full consequences. Mercury and Saturn can be about depression. It can be about negativity. And I think with all that's happening, this has clearly had a major impact, obviously, on his public reputation and how he relates to the world at large. And so there it is, Saturn hitting the Aries point. When he's got Saturn-Mercury opposition hitting the Aries point, this is a major blow to him. And it looks to me quite depressive and really very, very difficult. And I would have thought it's going to be difficult for him to come back from this. It is going to be really tough. And I suspect that it hasn't quite finished. But as I said, I'm not an expert on P. Diddy. I'm sure you know far more about him than me, and perhaps you can enlighten me in the comments. So that's it on P. Diddy. Thank you very much for listening to me. Again, my apologies for not knowing very much about the subject, but I thought I'd make an effort to look at his horoscope and look at what is going on around him. So if you did enjoy this video, I would be really grateful if you were to press the like button. If you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.